This ESPN podcast is brought to you by Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance. Visit geico.com.
The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
This is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
it might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't
The
care.
BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the sports guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report, a hazy Wednesday morning here in Southern California. On the phone right now, fellow Boston native from Rolling Stone magazine and RollingStone.com, Matt Taibbi. What's happening?
How you doing, Bill?
Good to talk to you. You're in New York now, right?
Yeah. Horrible game last night.
It was the rare combination of bad weather, Alfredo Aceves, and a whole bunch of things went wrong. It's a very likable Red Sox team this year, and I'm slowly coming to the realization that, you know, I thought like the last 5 years I was kind of falling out of love with baseball a little bit. I wasn't watching as much. I was like, maybe it's just too slow. Maybe I'm changing. Maybe the 2 World Series kind of ruined it for me, and there's not the same stakes anymore.
Right.
And the reality is, I realize now I just didn't like the guys in the team. And I like the guys on this year's team, so I'm watching every game. And that's really why, because I like this year's team.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I had the same thought over the weekend. I was thinking, the funny thing is football is probably not going to exist in 50 years, but there's still going to be baseball, and it'll still be pretty cool, I think. It's still fun to watch. I had stopped watching the last couple of years just because they were just impossible to watch, but it is fun to watch.
Yeah, and I think a little part of it, at least for me, was just we had always grown up hating the Yankees, and they had these financial advantages that the Red Sox never tapped into. And, by 2000, that wasn't even really the Mania contract was the tipping point for that.
Right.
Where all of a sudden we were spending as much money as they were, but it was at least on guys who were kind of goofy and they were characters, and gradually that faded away. And suddenly we're just spending money on these guys like John Lackey and Adrian Gonzalez and Carl Crawford. And it was just hard to connect. And now I see like somebody like Mike Napoli, who's my favorite Red Sox since Manny, I think. And he just feels like a Red Sox player. He's dumpy. He's got the beard. Every time he comes up, I think he's going to hit the monster. Yeah,
no, and he's actually the whole team has the same hair arrangement. They've all got shaved heads and shaggy beards, just like Napoli. They're like upside down people.
There's an identity with this year's team, and it was the last piece of last week and how the horrible everything about last week, and the Red Sox kind of had the last word a little bit on Saturday. Right. With a really nice pregame ceremony. The Hallelujah thing was fantastic. The anthem, just the whole thing. And the
slightly awkward David Ortiz speech.
The F-bomb. It was kind of in character though.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. And then Neil Diamond lip syncing, which was kind of everything you'd want from that moment. I don't know. It was such a strange week. Where did you follow the whole week? Were you just home watching it on the internet and TV like the rest of us? Yeah, pretty much. I was working on something else last week, and it's just one of those stories that just at least start leaving on TV all week, and it was crazy to watch. It definitely was. I did, and it was it's funny for me. It had a lot of weird personal significance for me. Among other things, I grew up right near the UMass Dartmouth campus, where he went to school. I used to play when it was back in the day. It was called Southern Mass University. Yeah. I used to hang out there a lot, so that was kind of upsetting to me to know that that's going to be descended upon by
a gazillion law enforcement agents and reporters and everything. It's sort of a remote, peaceful part of the state, and so that was kind of a drag. And then, obviously the Chechen aspect of it for me too, because I know I lived in Russia for 10 years and went through some of that. So, it's a long, strange week, and there's going to be a lot of sorting out to do, I think.
Yeah. I want to get to that Russian thing in a second. I think, I think everybody who grew up in Boston, and it was tough. I actually couldn't write a column about this. It was one of the few times I ever, for whatever reason, just couldn't put all my feelings about it into words. And I think part of it was because the marathon is such a personal thing for everyone that comes from Boston. It's hard not to write about that, about what happened, without making it about yourself. And
right.
I just didn't feel like this was the time or the place to do that. But, for me, it's like, and I'm sure you're the same. You grew up, right in Massachusetts like I did. You don't even remember when your first marathon was.
Right.
It's something that you just started going. Like, it's just, you don't remember life without, I couldn't tell you when my first one was. I probably watched it from 7 different parts of the course over the times of my life. My wife ran it twice. The first year I was dating my wife, she ran it. My Uncle Chuck, when I was 10 years old, he ran it in 1980. It was literally one of the most exciting moments of my childhood that he tried, he finished it in less than 4 hours. And
where did you watch it from? Were you at Heartbreak Hill, or where did you go?
That one, we were at the finish line, and, in that big mass of people, which after a while you realize that the worst place to watch the marathon is to go down for the finish line, because the Red Sox game pours out into that, and it's just a mass of people.
Right.
So you start picking these little spots along the line, but, it's hard to explain to anybody who's not from Massachusetts, like, what that day means. It's a holiday.
Yeah, no, it's totally a ritual. I mean, it's the marathon, it's the Red Sox game. I mean, I remember sneaking out, in between classes when I was in elementary school to listen to the radio broadcast of the Sox game in the morning, because it's always a morning game,
Yeah, 11 o'clock.
Right. So, and then, it was an ugly thing, definitely.
And then when we were kids, Bill Rogers was kind of the guy. He won it a few times. And the Rosie Ruiz thing happened, I think, in 1980. Was it 80 or 81? And that was one of the biggest things I can remember happening as a kid. Just that somebody faked winning the marathon and they didn't catch her. And it's kind of unbelievable now. There's no way anybody could do that nowadays, but,
that's right. It would be all over YouTube. Yeah.
And plus they have the cameras at every mile. Like, it would just be impossible.
Right.
I don't know why we haven't done a 30 for 30 short about that, because that would be a natural. She rode the subway at one point.
Did she really?
Yeah. She got on the train and went cut like 10 miles and then just kind of hopped back in. But, yeah, it's also this holiday that you get if you live in Massachusetts that no other state gets. We never really totally figured out what we were celebrating, but it was never an issue.
Right.
I guess we're celebrating, I don't even know. What are we celebrating?
I think it's Lexington and Concord Day, right? I mean, it has something to do with that, doesn't it?
I guess. I always assumed it had something to do with the 1770s, but never do. Never do exactly why. And, after this happened, it was so horrible. And I think, like everybody else, was wondering, so what happens to the marathon? Like, how are they going to do this? And then you just start talking to people from back home, and everybody was in the same FU mode. Oh yeah, we're having it next year, and it's going to be the biggest one yet, and I'm running it. I already know like 7 people are running it next year.
You're going to run it?
I'm not running it. I know 7 people who never would have run it who are now running it next year, and I think that's going to be the mentality. I just think it's going to get the biggest turnout of runners we've ever seen for that thing. You mentioned you had the Russian connection, so what was it?
I actually almost got blown up in a different Chechen bomb attack in Moscow in August of 2000.
So what happened?
Well, I lived in Moscow for a long time, and then obviously there's a lot of ugly history here dating back to the early 90s. There were genocides, and in Chechnya, the Yeltsin government did some really horrible things. They basically pulled a Dresden with the capital city of Grozny, and then after that there were for the next 5 or 6 years a succession of attacks on regular Russian territory, and they got to be so common that you almost can't find them in the news anymore. I mean, they were, by the time 1999, 2000, in my mind's eye, I think there were a couple bombing every month and a half, 2 months, and I just happened to be right next to one of them. There's a metro station in the center of Moscow, the Pushkinskaya metro station. I bought a hat in the underpass outside the station. Walked out, and then literally 2 minutes later, a bomb went off in the underpass, and I think 8 people died, 100 people got injured. But again, it was such a common occurrence in the city at that time that it barely made the news anymore. So it was sort of a fact of life in Russia for the entire country for 10 years, more at least.
So when you heard about the where these bombers came from and their connection and all that stuff, what was your reaction?
Well, I think a lot of the people who lived over there, during the Yeltsin years especially, had kind of the same reaction. Well, the first thing is that it's the worst, most implacable blood feud that can possibly exist. I mean, it's sort of like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Chechen-Russian thing it's a conflict that you can't really talk about without offending somebody. It's never the hatred levels are never gonna subside, and so the last thing you want is for it to expand and come over here, and that was sort of my first reaction, is that we just don't want to be part of this, because it's a never-ending cycle of violence and retribution, and it hasn't really died down in 16, 17 years. So I hope it's not. I really kind of hope it turns out to be just these 2 brothers that are acting alone, and not at the direction of somebody back in Chechnya, because that would be a bad thing, I think, for us. It would suck us into another conflict that has a completely different set of dynamics than the one that we're already in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, that would be bad, definitely.
So let's say there was a connection. What would be the motivation?
Well, the motivation would be that countries like the United States, and actually the entire Western world, supported the Yeltsin government and kind of turned a blind eye when Yeltsin committed a genocide in 1994. I mean, there's a long backstory here that dates back to the late 1700s about the Russians trying to take over that part of the world. Stalin actually at one point physically removed the entire Chechen population and just put them in trains and moved them into the middle of the desert in Central Asia. They were moved back in 1957, and then after the Soviet Union collapsed, all the different nationalities in Russia were asked to sign a treaty that would make them subject to the new Russian state, and the Chechens were the only ones who refused to sign. And so Yeltsin resorted to increasingly aggressive tactics to kind of force them under his heel. And eventually he kind of resorted basically to just firebombing the capital, among other things. There were hundreds of thousands of civilian casualties, according to some people. And during this entire period, we were giving enormous amount of financial and political support to Yeltsin. Now, I'm in no way justifying what happened. I'm just saying that if you lived in that part of the world during this time, you could see how somebody could become radicalized in all kinds of directions pretty easily, and so that's probably the superficial explanation if that's what happened. And again, I hope that's not what it is, because there are reports that it has nothing to do with that, that the older brother was more upset about Iraq and Afghanistan. So,
and I hate to say this, but it's really hard for me to believe that these two brothers acted alone, and that they weren't part of something that was a little bit bigger. I mean,
right. Especially since they were apparently flagged by the FSB, the successor agency to the KGB. So the older brother was anyway.
Right.
So.
Well, all right. So let's say there was a connection. Wouldn't the people from Chechnya? I can never say it.
Chechnya.
How do you say it? Chechnya. I mean, God, I can't even say some NBA players' names, so I have no hope with that one. But wouldn't they have claimed credit for this by now if they were responsible? I mean, I would assume that would be part of the appeal if they were involved and they were rigging some sort of terrorist attack, that they'd want to show people that they did it.
It could be, but the thing is, the whole Chechen nationalist movement now is fractured in a million pieces. And it's not as organized and unified as it was in the mid '90s, for instance, when they were fighting against Yeltsin. They've been kind of put to heel a little bit more in the Yeltsin years. I mean, in the Putin years. So you could see it being connected to somebody there, but it may not be somebody who wants to stick his head above ground and risk the retribution that will almost certainly come, whether by us or by the Russians, once this whole mystery is unwound. So you could see that. I mean, there's lots of conspiracy theories flying around now about all this, but yeah, again, you're right. The thing that makes you nervous about it is that they used exactly the same kinds of bombs that you see in Afghanistan and the other in Iraq and those other theaters, and so that definitely makes you nervous that it's not just a couple of idiots up in Boston cooking this up.
Last week, especially Thursday night, when the MIT cop got executed, basically, at point blank range, and then these guys were on the loose, and there was a shootout. It turned into a kind of incredible internet night, and I don't mean incredible in a good way. You had, for better and worse, people passing along information. A lot of it was helpful, especially on Twitter. Like, hey, here's what the Boston Globe just wrote. Here's something the New York Times put up just now. Here's a Twitter photo from somewhere. Like, a lot of that stuff was really good. But then on the other hand, you had all of these people on the internet, basically playing detective and trying to make correlations between this and that. There was a couple hours in there where the poor brown kid who had been missing for a few weeks, all of a sudden everybody decided he was one of the bombers.
Right.
And you had people, visible people who are relatively well known, like tweeting information about this kid with the insinuation being he was one of the kids. Meanwhile, he was just found dead this week. It was just a bizarre day for journalism. And you're somebody that over the past 20 years, like you've been, you're one of the all-time just go out into the heart of what's happening and talk to as many people as possible. This is kind of the antithesis of that. So what did you feel that night?
I just think the internet, I think, is a net plus for journalism. Usually,
I agree.
Because you get so many more voices and people can have an impact without having a major financial sponsor, which is a really key thing, because that allows poorer people to have some impact on reporting the news. You don't have to be tied to a big corporation to have a voice, which is great. But in the middle of events like this, people just don't realize how irresponsible it is to put out unconfirmed information in the middle of something like this, because people do overreact, and they'll go out and they'll make really bad decisions based on inaccurate reports. I mean, it's kind of like what happens in the first days of NBA or NFL free agency, right? You get all these posers putting up fake Twitter accounts saying that, so and so signed with this team, and that's all fun and games when it's sports, but when it's real life, people like to kind of play journalist, and it can be a disastrous thing, because people would behave emotionally in the middle of these things. So yeah, I had the same reaction to you. I thought there was a lot of bad stuff that went on during that period. I
agree that it's a net plus. And I actually like I don't mind that there's Reddit threads with people trying to play detective and all that stuff, but I think the part that got lost, especially on Thursday night, is to take everything with a grain of salt. And,
right.
It's almost like, back comparing it to sports, like if you're evaluating a draft prospect, you don't just use stats. You use like your scouts, whatever, you use tapes, you use 7 different things to try to come to a conclusion. And
unless you're the Bengals and you can't afford it.
Right. Unless you're yeah. But on Thursday night, it was just people taking one piece of a fact and just saying, that must be it.
Right.
And you got to take everything with a grain of salt. I thought all that stuff was interesting. I liked the fact that people were doing it. I liked having the option of debating whether that was true or not. But at the same time, it did feel like, especially with the poor kid who went to Brown, when his name got dragged through the mud that night, it felt like we crossed the line. And
what's also happened, which I think is a really bad thing, is that it used to be like the quote unquote mainstream news organizations would never go near certain stories unless they could confirm it, a couple of different ways, right? Unless we have 2 sources on this, we're not going to go out in public with it. But what they've started to do is they started to report about internet discussions, and so that's like it's like an end around journalistic ethics. I mean, if you remember that crazy debate that Bush had with Kerry, and Bush had like this lump under his suit, and there was all this speculation on the internet that somebody was giving him the answers in the middle of the debate.
Yeah.
Well, that was just like an internet rumor, but it ended up on the front page of the New York Times because they did a story about the internet rumor. And so that now you have mainstream news organizations that are reporting about stuff that's unconfirmed just because people are talking about it. So that it's like this weird, cycle of misbehavior that's an additional problem now. Like if enough people start talking about this stuff, pretty soon it's going to end up on CNN or Fox or whatever, and that's even worse.
And people were celebrating, especially on Thursday night, about how Twitter was just killing the news networks. Mm-hmm. And for some part that was true, but on the other part, you also saw why the news networks were being so cautious, because you do have to get stuff confirmed, and you can't just go on the air with something that ended up on a message board 5 minutes ago. It was kind of fascinating to watch how, especially I was stuck in LA trying to watch everything. If you were in Boston, you had better coverage because they had more cameras like right there and people who knew the area. On CNN, you had, freaking Jake Tapper, who had no idea where Watertown was compared to where he was. He called it Watertown, New York at one point. Like it was clear that he had been to Boston 2 times. But
yeah, I remember one of the anchors was talking about how I didn't even know there was a UMass Dartmouth campus.
Yeah, that's where you have to get somebody who's actually from the area to be your guy on the ground. But CNN, because they had gotten burned earlier in the week with the John King thing, swung the other way, and they were so cautious. There was actually no reason to watch CNN. They had nothing to offer. They were just looping the same clip over and over again. It was like watching In Speed with Keanu Reeves when they looped the shot of the bus over and over again because they trying to fool Dennis Hopper. That was CNN. MSNBC was a little bit better. Fox News was a tiny bit better, but ultimately, all the networks seemed paralyzed by the difference between what they could do and what the internet could do. As somebody who's spent 20 years now doing this, like, what did you feel about that disparity?
Well, what's going to end up happening, it's like that phenomenon, with the use of excessive force that they always talk about. They call it, what do they call it? Force drift, where, like, if you're allowed to just waterboard somebody according to the manual, and that doesn't work, you'll eventually start going to the next level automatically. If the permitted techniques don't work, they find this over and over again, that interrogators will start drifting into the next level of ethically unacceptable behavior, and that happens with the media too. When we start to lose, with the restraints that we have, like fact checking or checking with a lawyer before we put something out in the air, or refraining from speculating about who this might be, then the first thing that's going to start happening is that we're going to break those rules the next time, and we're going to chuck the fact checking and and we're going to try to beat Twitter, or we're going to have Twitter on TV, and we're going to be commenting on that, and that's what's going to happen. So I don't know. I think it's kind of it's a weird situation. The whole thing is an odd paradox for the TV news business.
Yeah, it feels like something of a no man's land. And then you brought up like the NBA free agency and that time, which was just fascinating last year, and it's turned into this thing with the draft and especially the first 2 days of NFL free agency, with people now report things by saying, hearing the Bengals might make a move on so and so.
Right.
If whether it comes true or not true, it doesn't matter.
Right.
In the old days, it was like the Bengals are trading for a blank, and that's when you reported it. Now the conjecture has become part of the reporting. It's almost like become reporting crossed with entertainment. And I actually like it this way, but I like getting as much information as possible. Oh, really? They're talking to blank? But at the same time, I don't think people realize how easy it is for people within, like, take the NBA. Agents can float stuff out to reporters, assistant GMs, like everybody has an agenda with the information they leak.
Oh,
and
totally.
if you notice, usually when stuff happens, it's usually something that we never had any inkling it was going to happen.
Right.
It'd be like, whoa, they traded what? Why didn't we hear about this? Usually if there's rumors of the trade, it never happens. The one exception was when Rudy Gay got traded to Toronto in February, because there were so many leaks on both sides. It just kind of leaked out even before they had agreed. But
right. Well, there was a little bit of that with the Welker thing this year. I thought his agent was trying to drum something up at the last minute. With the
no question.
Right. So
yeah,
I mean, that's what it seemed like to me anyway. But that's usually what it is, right? It's usually an agent whispering to some reporter because he's trying to get a better deal somewhere else. So
or get the word out
though.
that, or he's trying to get the word out that the deal is going south and wants to create a certain level of panic.
Right.
I'm pretty careful with when I tweet stuff about if I hear information, and I'm always passing it along in a way that, like for instance, the Welker thing happened. It was down to two teams. It was down to the Patriots and Denver, and I hadn't seen anybody write that. And I knew for a fact it was down to those two teams, and they were basically, he was deciding between the two offers. So I tweeted that. And is that a report? I don't know. I just said, hey, I'm hearing that the Patriots and Broncos, it's down to the Patriots and Broncos for Welker, which it was, and that's what it came out. But I didn't really report that. I just passed along something I heard. And then afterwards I was like, should I have done it that way? Should I report it? Like, I had all this doubt about it after.
Really? No, that sounds legit. I mean, you got it from somebody, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it just seems like I was worried that it fell into that, what a lot of people do now is just kind of throw stuff out.
Well, if it didn't come from anywhere at all, that would be be something else entirely.
Sure, if I made it up.
Exactly. If you were incarcerated Bill, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh God. Hey, quickly about the Patriots.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't won the Super Bowl.
I know.
I say we like I'm on the team. We haven't won the Super Bowl since Tiger Woods last won the Masters. That's how long it's been. Yeah, 2005. The beginning of George W. Bush's second term. That was the last time the Patriots won the Super Bowl.
That's really depressing.
Lost was in season 2. The Sopranos was still on the air. The OC was completing its first season. It was a while ago. It was 2 full presidential terms ago.
I know.
And we're heading into the season with a 61-year-old coach,
right,
and a 36-year-old quarterback.
Well, you're big on that, right? That a coach can't be over a certain age.
Well, history says it's bad, but then after I wrote that speed limit corollary thing about if you're over 55, it gets dangerous. But then Tom Coughlin won the Super Bowl.
Right.
So
right.
Maybe I think it's definitely, put it this way, there's no way Belichick is as good at this job right now as he was 15 or 12 years ago, right? You're not going to have the same energy now. He's 61. Yeah. It's a job you're doing it for 18 hours a day, basically, during the season. Like, you can't have that motor.
You do see him occasionally having fun in places now, which is not a good sign, you know? Like,
yeah, I don't like that he has a girlfriend. I wish he was single.
Right, yeah. He should be like the guy in the Da Vinci Code who just sits there whipping himself at night, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
That's what I want. That's my image of Belichick. I don't like that he's like in Nantucket for a month with his girlfriend in some nice house. Like, no, you should be in a film room studying these guys. But we're heading for another Patriots draft here, and it's always the most frustrating day of the year for Patriots fans because there's all this hope, and you pin your hopes on these certain guys, and then they trade down. And they finally didn't do it last year for the first time in eons, but.
And then they ruined it by picking Tavon Wilson, though, in the second round, which was like the all-time Bill Belichick middle finger move, right?
Yeah. He should just stop taking defensive backs, too. I'd be fine with.
Right.
The success rate has been really a catastrophe for the amount of, like, and now it's gotten to the point when they took Rasai Dowling and the knock on him was injury prone all the way through college. And it's like, oh, this isn't going to, the combination of our bad luck with defensive backs and this guy's bad luck with staying on the field. This is a disaster. And, you did a draft decoder thing that I really enjoyed.
Right.
One of your rules, you had a bunch of rules that teams should follow. One of the rules I totally agree with is always draft the weed guy.
Yeah, definitely.
I think you're really onto something with this. Don't be scared by the weed guy.
It's true, right? Though every year there's like 3 of them, right?
Yep.
So every year there's some great college player who, and it comes out that he either failed the a marijuana test at the combine, or failed a bunch at his school. Or you already knew that because he had to transfer out of his school. And for some reason that knocks some great college player, many rounds down the draft. And Aaron Hernandez, or, Randy Moss, who could have been number 1 overall in that draft, or Percy Harvin, or Warren Sapp. I mean, there's the weed guys is a pretty strong group of players. If you were to put them all together on one team, you'd have a pretty solid squad. And this year, there's 3 of them, right? There's the Honey Badger, right? And and that kid from Tennessee Tech, Derek Rogers, and Keenan Allen. I haven't seen a lot of him play a lot. Have you seen him?
No,
yeah.
I know those 3 is the weed 3 though.
Right. Yeah. He also is hurt, and he just ran a 4.7, so he's got all kinds of problems. But the other two, I just think they're great players, and they're going to go low just because they like to smoke weed a lot, like every other kid who's ever gone to college. So
yeah, I was going to say, like, judging college kids for smoking weed is probably not the best thing to do. But then on top of it, I do feel like 2/3 of the NFL probably smokes weed anyway.
Right, yeah, and
They're
they
just
have some
discreet
kind of
about
way
it.
of dealing with it, don't they? I mean, there's some kind of Wizinator therapy that they do, like,
Yeah.
to make the problem go away. Like, I kind of doubt that they all stopped smoking weed when they got to the NFL.
No, there's no way. There's a 0% chance. Another
I mean,
thing
even
you had,
even the FBI guys, even the FBI, they can't find applicants anymore who didn't smoke weed in college. So if it's not if it's not a problem for the FBI, it shouldn't be a problem for the NFL, I don't think.
another one you had was, did the guy put up stats in college? This is
Right.
why I'm with you, because I feel the same way about basketball. If you're taking some swingman who averaged 11 points a game in college, that's to me a red flag. I need to know that you can either put the ball in the basket or you can't.
Right.
And this is my favorite prospect in this entire draft, the NFL draft, is the wide receiver from West Virginia, Tavon Austin.
Right. We scored like a gazillion touchdowns. Right.
Yeah, he had monster stats in college and great work ethic. The only rap on him is that he's small. Wes Welker's small. Like, I just look at this guy, and I know the Pats won't do this, but I had my hopes set that they'll somehow trade up and get this guy, and they will just put him in the Welker slot, and he'll be like this. He'll be like basically if Troy Brown and Wes Welker had Troy Brown from 2002 and Wes Welker from 2007 had a kid, and then you put that kid on steroids and caffeine and all kinds of things. That would be what this guy did for Tom Brady. But, like, you think, like, Tom Brady's 36. This will be his 13th year as a starter. Like, why are we rolling? You got to go for it at some point.
Yeah, I know.
I want to see them trade up and get this guy.
Right. Yeah, but that's just not what they do.
I know.
They just, I don't know. I thought they did a good job. I thought in free agency this year they got a bunch of guys who I think are good, but and they spent like a little bit more money than they usually do.
Yeah.
But yeah, you might as well, go out and, I mean, last year, why didn't they get Vincent Jackson? I didn't understand that at all. Like, he would have been perfect for that team. And, instead you spend almost the same amount of money on Steve Gregory and Jonathan Fanene and I don't know who else, Kyle Arrington or whoever. They've proven that if you have that guy, that serious wide receiver, they can score a gazillion points, but they just don't do it. So it's weird. It's weird that they don't do it.
I blame Brady a little bit because I almost feel like a lot of times he's like an Irish Catholic housewife from the 1940s who doesn't want to say anything or make any waves because it's not her place, even though her husband hasn't worked in 10 years and he's a drunk. Brady kind of has that mentality almost, especially the Welker thing. They're basically paying Amendola the same as Welker wanted, give or take $1 million. I guess they were able to spread out Amendola's contract a little bit, which helps him a tiny bit for the cap, but not prohibitively. And the Welker thing was just strange to me because you bring in Amendola and you're basically saying this guy has a chance to be a younger Welker if we can keep him on the field. And I'm sitting there going, well, but we could just get Wes Welker. Right. How about that? How about just bringing back Wes Welker would be cool. And I don't know. And it's got to be I think there's some weird Belichick-Welker tension. Yeah, you could tell, that whole Welker thing about wanting to stick it to Bill and. Yeah. Right. And yeah, I think they genuinely wanted Amendola over Welker. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. Yeah. They wanted it this way, And maybe. I do feel like Welker kind of signed his departure papers with the Rex Ryan thing when he made the Jets mad. Right. It was very un-Belichick-y.
Right.
That whole thing.
Right.
His players
Yeah.
are supposed to be seen and not heard.
Right. Exactly.
But did you watch the Belichick documentary?
Yeah. Of course.
There was a scene in there when him and Wes, you could tell they were a little off.
Oh, the scene when Edelman scores the punt return touchdown.
Yeah.
And Belichick makes the Wally Pip joke.
Yes.
And Welker's like, well, he can have my job.
And he was like, way to compete.
Way to compete. Yeah, exactly.
It was like, whoa.
Yeah.
I'm already resigned to him catching 158 balls next year in Denver.
Oh yeah, I know. It's going to be horrible.
It'll be Manning will just go out of his way to throw it to him 12 times a game just to stick it to the Patriots.
Right. Right.
So you've done a lot of stuff about the economy, all the weird crap that Wall Street pulled over the last 4 or 5 years. I don't think this was something you intended to spend the last, 7 years of your career now writing?
Yeah, no, definitely, yeah.
You've become like probably the number one expert on it. Like, does this just keep going? How long do you do this?
Well, the thing is, it's like a corruption story without end. So there's an endless amount of material, and it's really complicated. And I love writing about this stuff. It's like true crime writing, except it's 5 times more complicated than your usual crime stories. And so it's I have like a personal mania for it, and the other side of it is that there's not a whole lot of people writing about it. So I have like this little corner of the universe that is sort of all to myself now, and these guys oblige by never stop being, they never stop being greedy and corrupt and coming up with some new horrible way to steal from everybody. So it's fascinating, but yeah, it's totally unexpected. I never thought I'd be doing this for a living. I couldn't even balance my checkbook when I started writing about this stuff. But
it seems like there's a sophistication to just everything about it that it's almost like AP biology or something in high school, where you have to study and study and study to figure out just everything about the landscape. And you mentioned how there's not a lot of people writing about it. It's probably because there's no way to just kind of gradually get into it. You either have to be all in 1,000% or you're not in at all.
Right. Yeah. That's absolutely true. If you're not, you can't just kind of helicopter in and cover. Like, for instance, last year there was what should have been a huge international story, this thing with the manipulating LIBOR, which is like the London interbank offered rate. This is the rate at which all interest rates are based upon. And the biggest banks in the world were kind of getting together and screwing around with these rates, which affected like $700 trillion worth of financial products. So it's probably the biggest criminal conspiracy in the world, in history, actually.
Wow.
But you can't just drop in and cover it because it's just too complicated if you don't speak the language, a lot of it is just too hard to do. And I think a lot of reporters are just intimidated by the amount of time it will take to have to sink your teeth into all of it. So they just don't bother. And that leaves basically me and then a whole bunch of people who are, sympathetic to Wall Street to cover this stuff. So
how long did it take you to learn the language? A couple years?
A long time. Yeah, like a year at least. In the beginning, I was calling people up and I was literally saying things like, just tell me something about something. Like I didn't,
Right.
I didn't know anything. And it's like the law or biology or anything. It's all cloaked in its own language. And if you don't understand it, you're not going to get very far. It's actually a lot like sports. Like if you don't follow sports from when you're a little kid, you can't watch a baseball game and understand what the hell they're talking about. they don't stop in the middle and tell you what a balk is, or what the infill fly rule is. You just got to know, and that's kind of what this story is like. They don't stop in the middle and tell you what a collateralized debt obligation is. You have to know what it is, and so it's definitely an uphill climb, but I love it. I mean, to me, it's like a new episode of The Sopranos every day. It's just a new sorted, organized crime scheme to sort through.
Well, you have villains that are like the ultimate villains, and there's just a never-ending slew of them. One's gone, and then here comes the next one, and this guy, wow, is he bad, and he did this, and it really is like crime in that respect. But in crime, maybe you'll get one fascinating serial killer or murderer, whoever, every couple years, and this you have 4 or 5 a year.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And they're most of your serial killers, a couple of them are articulate and Ted Bundy types who have some kind of bookish appeal to them. But all of these guys are educated. They're not just brutes. They've made a conscious decision to kind of go over to the dark side, and so they're like articulating this really, really dark vision of humanity all the time. And they're fascinating to watch and to listen to. I mean, the arrogance it's really, I mean, it's just entertaining to follow and just to listen to, much more so than ordinary crime, which is just most of the time it's just people beating each other over the head. These guys are really, really interesting, and they're very appropriate subjects. If you're for any kind of literary endeavor, they're challenging people to describe. So that's another thing that's cool about it.
So if you did your corporate evil guy power rankings for the last 6-7 years of what you covered, who's number one?
That's interesting. Sort of like your trade value chart, right? Like
I think this is. I just came up with a column for you. This is a no-brainer. Pump this out in an hour.
Probably Jamie Dimon. The guy he's the head of Chase. He's up there. The head of Goldman, Lloyd Blankfein. He's pretty good. The head of Countrywide, which was that mortgage company down in Southern California, Angelo Mazzillo. He was great, and he was great for a couple of reasons, among other things because he had like the best spray-on orange tan out of any of these guys. But they all have, they all have one thing in common. They all have this like sneering attitude, like they're insulted that they even have to answer your question. That it's just such an inconvenience to them that they even have to think about explaining themselves to other people, and that just, to me, that makes them just intensely attractive people. And I think Jamie Dimon really exemplifies that the best. If you want to watch an entertaining, couple of minutes, just turn into one of his Senate appearances where he sits there rolling his eyes and sneering the whole time, like he just can't believe he has to waste his time explaining himself to the United States Senate. That's just, this is the kind of people we're dealing with.
Has he been captured in a documentary?
Not one that would be unsympathetic. I mean, a lot of these guys do, have themselves sort of lionized in various, television features that are friendly. But I don't think you've ever seen like an unvarnished portrait of one of these people on television, just because you never get that kind of access. There's been a couple of people who've been caught, lower level types who've been caught with various scams and then have kind of confessed later on about their whole private lives. There was a guy who was involved in that sort of real estate Ponzi scheme who did a documentary last year. I don't remember what his name was. but none of the high level guys. We don't really know what they're really like behind closed doors, and that would be really cool to find out. It would be interesting.
I like the power rankings idea.
Yeah, definitely.
I would read that. I'd love to know and count it down backwards because I'd love the suspense to build as it went down and down. Each guy had credentials.
That's right.
Do you feel like it was so bleak there for a couple of years, and then this year people seem to be optimistic about a few things about the economy, real estate market, stuff like that. Are you a believer, or do you feel like this is fool's gold?
I don't know. I mean, I hear most of the people who talk to me are all such doomsayers, and they insist that any recovery is temporary. A lot of the problems that we have are not so much economic as political. They're this whole issue of you have these 6 or 7 companies that are they're too big to fail, so they commit horrible crimes, and then we don't prosecute them because we're afraid to cause disruption to the economy. And that situation keeps getting worse every year. So irrespective of whether or not there's an economic recovery going on, you have this kind of worsening problem of unaccountability and impunity on Wall Street, where guys know that they can commit virtually any kind of crime and get away with it. Like, HSBC, earlier this year, they got busted for, among other things, laundering $800 million for a couple of South American drug cartels, and they didn't face a single criminal charge for that. They paid a little bit of money, and then the whole thing went away. So like nobody does even a day in jail for that. And meanwhile, people go to jail, and do real time for smoking a joint. So,
right.
I think that situation gets worse and worse all the time. And so I'm kind of more focused on that than I am on whether or not the economy is really rebounding or not. Because what we've seen with this is that a lot of the crime that went on before 2008, before that crash, was just undetected by the authorities because they no longer felt like they had the power to go after these companies, and so all sorts of problems were sort of left undetected for a long time, and that just could be happening again right now. We just wouldn't know because nobody's regulating these firms.
Yeah, that was a big theme when you started writing about this a few years ago. You could barely hold back your outrage for how the legal system treated some of these people.
Right.
And I would remember reading it and thinking, this is like really substantial work here. Like things are going to change when people read about what, some of the stuff that's happened and how little penalties these guys have paid. But it's, now a few years later, it doesn't seem like anything has really changed.
No, I think people have outrage fatigue. I think ultimately what comes down to, they just don't want to think about it. Even I don't want to think about it. I come home from work and I just watch sports all night. It's what I do. So I think most people, they're difficult, depressing, complicated problems that aren't going to change without a lot of effort on the part of everybody. And that's, probably not going to happen. So people just don't want to think about it. But, I'm still a little bit optimistic. I think, among other things, a lot of these guys on Wall Street are so obnoxious that they've actually offended the people in Washington, to the point where even the money doesn't make it all right anymore. So I think, that's kind of an interesting subplot right now, is that I think they're starting to lose their grip over, say, the Senate and the House, because they just personally are so obnoxious that they just don't have a hold over those guys anymore.
Have you ever dove into one of my favorite topics in a sports sense, which is these rich billionaires who somehow sucker cities into building them stadiums?
Oh God, I that drives me up a wall. I don't know. What's your feeling about that? Oh,
I'm kind of hoping we're coming to an end of that era. I was hoping the the guy in Miami and what
Ross,
he did to the Marlins, and just everything that happened there would be the final straw. And now you're seeing, like, in Seattle, if they get the NBA team, whether it's the Kings or somebody else, those guys are paying for their own arena. You're seeing in Golden State, they're paying for their own arena, which is the way it should be.
Right.
Especially with the price of sports franchises and how they go up, it's one of the best investments you can make. And then on top of it, like, nobody has ever been able to show any real proof that the city paying for an arena or the Olympics or really anything is something that makes sense as an investment. Nobody has ever been able to definitively prove that any of this stuff actually matters for the city. And yet people keep falling for that trick, and it's annoying.
Yeah, it's disgusting, especially when you think, I mean, here in New York, right? I forget what the subsidy was for the building in Yankee Stadium, but there was all kinds of infrastructural stuff that the Steinbrenner family got. I think it worked out to be $400 million worth of subsidies in one way or another for the new Yankee Stadium. So when you think about that, that means that the people who live in New York City are subsidizing the salary of Alex Rodriguez, basically, when it comes down to it. I mean, you're allowing the team to not allocate resources in one place so that they can overspend in some other place. And so it's like the least efficient use of public resources you can possibly imagine. I mean, it's one thing to say that, oh yeah, we have to pay a competitive salary for, I don't know, the head of the SEC or the Federal Trade Commission or whatever it is, because you do need an experienced executive to hold those positions, and you're not going to get them for $40,000 a year. But the taxpayer shouldn't be paying some guy $30 million a year to play third base. I mean, that just doesn't, especially if he's not going to play. It's just it's insane.
It's such a flawed formula, because you have, so the public paying for the ballpark. Then you would think, well, they'll give them a break on tickets, right? No, actually, they're going to jack the tickets up to crazy degrees so they can overplay the guys in the team. Everything about it is wrong. The baseball players make too much. The tickets are too much. And on top of it, the fans are paying for part of the stadium. Everything about that equation is wrong and makes no sense. And yet it continues to happen.
Yeah, but it's a perfect symbol for everything. It's you socialize the costs and you privatize the profit. I mean, that's the formula for modern government contracting. And it's across the board. I mean, it's not just sports. It's in all walks of life, in military contracting, on Wall Street. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that you get subsidies from the government, and yet they turn around and they manage to not give the public that gave the subsidy the benefit. And but it's particularly obscene with sports, where it's not necessary, where these guys can easily arrange private financing to do this for themselves. They can do a bond issue or whatever it is they're going to do. But they just choose not to. You know, they just recognize that people are so dependent upon their teams emotionally that they just have to threaten to move, and they'll get enough votes for some sucker politician to fork over $300 or $400 million to build a stadium that, you know, they won't even see the full benefit of. It's crazy that it goes on. And I think any politician who's involved in those deals, for me, I think is ineligible for office if you're a part of that kind of thing.
Well, I think that, I don't know how much you followed the Maloofs in Sacramento, but it brings everything to the table for this story. You have guys who don't have enough money to run the team, right? Mm-hmm. And you know, all of their other outside investments kind of ruin their teams. So their only asset they have is this Kings franchise. But the franchise is worth way more, you know, if they sell it to a majority owner, than it is for them to just have it, because it doesn't make enough money. But they don't want to sell it because it's an ego thing. Right. Their dad owned the Rockets. So that's the one thing they don't want to do, is sell it, but they also want to make more money from it. Whereas there's 50 other people who would buy that team in a second and do a million better things with it. So they're trying to have it both ways. They try to go to Anaheim because Anaheim's giving them I think $100 million up front, and then they get to keep their majority thing. They're basically trying to move the team out of Sacramento in the middle of the night, like Bob Irsay did.
Right.
And, Jerry Buss and Donald Sterling throw their bodies in front of that. So that falls through. So now they get the Seattle offer. Seattle offers them so much money that they're just like, wow, we're going to sell. And then Sacramento says, no, we'll pay for the stadium so you guys can stay. Now they're in this whole legal battle. And the reality is they're going to have to sell to local owners who are somehow paying for the stadium with the public because the public really wants the Kings to stay. And the reason they want the Kings to stay is because they know once they lose the Kings, then they're now Fresno, and it's like
right.
all of their identity is wrapped up in the fact like, oh, at least we have this one major league team. And the whole thing just sucks because everybody in the NBA is going to make hands over fist money over what's going to happen over the next few years. The league is in awesome shape. Their TV rights deal is going to be through the roof in 2 years. And it's almost like buying beachfront real estate, on Cabo or Malibu or wherever, where you just want to get a house on the beach. You don't even care what the house is.
Right.
And, anyway, sorry to go off on a rant.
No. You're
it's just
absolutely right.
It's just crazy. The whole thing is crazy to me. Like Sacramento shouldn't have to pay for part of this arena. I don't get it.
No. There's no reason that should happen. And I don't know. I don't know why David Stern doesn't do something. I mean, there should be just basically some kind of federal fatwa against that kind of behavior in all sports. It just shouldn't happen.
Well, do you agree with my theory that, I've joked about this for years, but now I really feel like this position should exist. Like we should have a sports czar. And the counter to this was, well, Obama has better things to do with his day than to worry about sports and all this stuff. But in my opinion, there's so many real life issues in sports that affect cities, money that's going in the wrong ways. Like you look at what's happening with football now with the concussions and all this and just all the different things that's going on there and boxing and it really does seem like that should be a job and this person would be able to help America in a lot of different ways.
I think they have jurisdiction because of all the antitrust exemptions. So, it's not like you'd be asserting authority where you don't already have it. I think it's a good idea. I think because among other things, it would prevent the Congress from wasting its time delving into issues just so they can grab headlines. Or the Department of Justice, chasing after Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens.
Waste of time.
Instead of pursuing real investigations. I mean, they're putting 20 and 30 agents on those cases, and they don't have agents to do those to waste on cases like that. But yeah, they should. I think especially as you say with everything that's going on in football, and it's not just pro sports. Obviously, there's
college,
college. I think it would be a great idea. It wouldn't have to be a big department. It would have a lot of symbolic import. It would be good. I think there's a lot of dirtiness that goes on in the lower levels of sports that they could probably do go a long way toward cleaning up, especially like with boxing. Boxing is a total mess. So college football.
You could even go all the way down to Pop Warner.
Oh yeah.
You have Pop Warner, you have these kids who get concussions and then their parents are throwing them back out there 2 weeks later. Meanwhile, every concussion study we've had is like, if you get a concussion before you're 14, you're a cajillion times more likely to get a second one,
Right.
And that should just be it. You get a concussion, that's it. You shouldn't play football anymore. And we're not regulating Pop Warner the way we should. And there's a million things. So basically you support the idea. You support my candidacy.
I do.
And you're going to be, I'm going to rely on you as my financial advisor. You might get a part on my cabinet because you're the only one who understands all these numbers. And you're a sports fan. I can't think of anyone who's more qualified.
That's great. As long as I get to be in one of the first official White House photos.
Yeah.
I'll be sitting next to the fireplace.
This will be good. I'm glad we worked this out.
All right.
And when is your book coming out?
Sometime late next year. This year. Late this year. So,
Late this year?
Yeah.
So you finished it?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, almost done. Yeah. So
Can you say what it's about or no?
Yeah, no, it's like I said, it's sort of it's a kind of a big compare and contrast exercise where I look at a bunch of Wall Street crime cases, and then I show how they all got away with everything, and then I look at a bunch of street crime cases that are like a million times more minor, and the punishments are much more extreme. So it's a kind of a rich justice, poor justice thing that just looks at the two different sides of the criminal justice system. But really, it's just a bunch of cool crime stories. So I put together, and it's good. It'll be a lot of fun.
I look forward to it. And we can check you out in Rolling Stone Magazine and rollingstone.com. Matt Taibbi, thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Bill. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you.
So I get to sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Podcenter at ESPNradio.com.
Peace out.
Geico presents Strange Savings Stories. Astronomers detected an interstellar transmission. It stated, Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. The implications were staggering. Was the cosmos telling us we could all save hundreds on car insurance with Geico? Or did their radar merely pick up a signal from the nearby Rufus and Clyde's morning show? We may never know.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.